This photo back behind me is a composite picture of the 2017 Total Solar Eclipse, and I took it in my backyard right here in St. Louis. There's another total eclipse coming up on April 8, and I'm going to try to do it again. I wanted to explain how I photographed the eclipse, and if you've never experienced a total solar eclipse yourself, it's kind of hard to describe. But it's something that if you can make, I definitely think you should, and I'll get to why later. But I'm going to run through how to safely take photos of the sun. Then I'm going to talk about the different parts of the eclipse and why totality is a completely different experience than any other kind of eclipse. Finally, I'll share my plans for this year's eclipse. And while I might not be using a Raspberry Pi for my photos, I know someone who is, and I'll tell you more about that too. The hardest thing to predict is weather. Especially here in Missouri, April is when we get the most severe weather. If you get clouds at the wrong time, even you might just be like a mile out of position, and that's enough to miss the whole show. But that's partly why I'm making this video. I'll have a great time with my family either way, but if we miss totality, I want you to also have a shot at capturing it. If you just whip out your cell phone and take a picture, you're probably going to end up with just a little dot in the sky. But if you have a good mirrorless or DSLR camera, or even if your smartphone has decent manual controls and a good zoom lens, you can get images like these. Something a lot closer to the beauty that's visible to your naked eye. The first thing I did back in 2017 was plan. I read up on tons of articles about how to take pictures of the sun. And that's a tricky thing, because first you're going to have to take photos of the sun, which requires crazy solar filters like this. Then, when totality starts, you have to pull these filters off, change exposure settings, and then be ready to go back again afterwards. If you don't do it right, you could burn out your camera sensor, or in some cases, even your eyes. This sheet is called a solar filter, and you can usually buy sheets like this for about $10 for a 6x6 inch square. And once you have some, you can put it in front of your camera lens, point it at the sun, and take a picture to see how it works. It's almost like a mirror on the front side. It blocks out 99.999% of all visible light, and that makes it so your camera sensor can see the sun in its natural colors and not burn out pixels. Like here, I have it covering the lens on my zoom lens. If I show you the video from my camera, this is what the sun looks like. And the first time you take a picture of the sun, you might be surprised. Like a lot of the time, there are visible sunspots. Those aren't specks of dust on your lens. Those are areas where the sun's surface is cooler. Well, I mean, we're talking like 3,500 degrees Celsius instead of the normal 4,000, but still. This video isn't a science lesson on the sun, but I can bet the more images you take, the more you're going to be reading about how the sun has its own ecosystem with some mind-boggling physics. I'll leave some links to a few cool videos so you can watch them if you want to go down that rabbit hole. And you might be wondering how I mounted up the solar filter on my lens. I actually made my own solar filter because pre-made filters get pretty expensive. I basically cut out some of this filter material in a circle and superglued it to a step-up ring that's the right size for my zoom lens. I have a blog post detailing that process that I'll link below. This will get you through the beginning and the end when any part of the sun is still visible. And even if there's even a tiny sliver of sun, you need this protection. Otherwise, you're going to burn out some pixels on your camera. Same thing for your eyes. I generally buy a pack of these solar eclipse glasses and hand them out to everyone I'm with. And a quick word on these, make sure you buy from a reputable brand. Oh boy. Yeah, you can't see. I don't see anything at all here. None of this is even close to as bright as the sun. But now that you have protection, it's time to start practicing taking pictures of the sun. And you should do that before the day of the eclipse. First of all, you're going to want a tripod, especially for totality. You don't need a star tracking mount if you're going to be snapping pictures, but if you have money to spare, that does make it a little easier. The more stable the tripod, the better. Next, you need to work on focus and exposure. If your camera's autofocus isn't that great, it's better to pre-focus on something far away than aim towards the sun with the autofocus turned off. And for me, the more zoom, the better, to a point. For me at least, the sun is the main thing I want to capture, and before totality, you want to get in nice and tight. You won't see anything else behind it anyway. But with focus and zoom locked in, we need to expose correctly for the sun, and that means setting your camera into full manual mode. Set a low ISO like 100 or 200, set your aperture to something like f8, and an exposure around a 500th of a second. Then adjust the exposure up and down a little until your picture looks great. For me, I'm using my zoom lens at full extension, 350 millimeters, but that's on an APS-C camera, which kind of crops in on it, so it's even more zoomed in, like 500 millimeters if you were using a full-frame camera. If you don't have a decent zoom lens, I'd recommend renting one. Check if you have a local camera shop, because I know some online rental places are already out of stock on some of their better lenses. Otherwise, see if someone else might have one that you can borrow. The point is to get zoomed into at least about 200 to 300 millimeters in full-frame equivalent. Most smartphones just aren't up to the task if you want a tight shot showing the prominences. But now I have a nice photo of the sun full blast on a sunny day, albeit with a few clouds. Something else you should test is exposure bracketing. Because the atmosphere could be hazy or the sun angle could be a little different, it's even better to take a few photos at a few different exposures. If your camera has automatic exposure bracketing, try it out and maybe set it to -2 and +2 so you can get a few exposures that are darker and brighter. When you're in totality, bracketing the exposure can even help you pull out background details like the stars or planets behind the sun. And speaking of totality, once the sun is completely covered up, it's gonna get pretty dark. How dark? Well, here's some footage I took with locked exposure on my GoPro back in 2017, and it basically goes from day to almost night. You can even see some stars in the sky. It's pretty crazy. And this is why totality is a completely different experience. You can even hear it in my footage. Besides us being excited about the sun, insects like crickets and cicadas got a little confused and think it's time to come out and make noise. But you can't simulate this perfectly. You can only kind of practice the process and then hope you nail it when it happens. The more practice, the better chance you can correct things if your exposure's off a little bit. So what I did is kept my aperture and ISO locked, and then I bumped my exposure time down to about 1/80th of a second. Exposure bracketing let me get some definition around the edges of the moon when I blended images together. That lets me show some of the solar prominences, these giant fireballs that are around the outside edges. If you want to swing for the fences, you can also get some exposures that show the moon itself and more of the stars in the sky. But you might have to get a little wild and take photos at higher ISOs or a lower aperture for that. I want to keep things simple, and I'll rely on other people for the wacky images that blend moon, sun, stars, and even planets. Back in 2017, I wrote more about my whole experience making my photos, and I'll link it down below. But all the things I've talked about are for getting still photos, and for me that's enough. But I know some people want to go the extra mile. You might want to take some high quality video through the whole event, or you might want to use composite photos incorporating the landscape, like this one from Sky and Telescope. Will Wang even built an absolutely brilliant solar imaging system completely automated by a Raspberry Pi. Not only does it look like the best of 1980s retro tech, it tracks the sun, uses a custom designed UI, a completely custom PCB, and he's even testing tons of different image sensors and fixing bugs in the Pi's imaging libraries to get the best images possible. But even with all that fancy gear, if you're in a place with clouds, it's a lot different and it can be a bit disappointing. Photography Life has a great article about how luck is an important part of photography, especially when you're working with nature. But there'll be a ton of photographers out this year sharing their work. Like, Will's gonna try shooting it in Texas, and you can follow him on Twitter or his blog. Some of the advanced stuff is out of my league, so I'm gonna give you plenty of links in the description. I've only experienced one eclipse, but there are photographers who travel around the world and know a lot more than I do. For me though, my main goal is simple: help my kids experience the awe and wonder of a total solar eclipse. So what if you want to see the eclipse? If you live near the path of totality, your best bet is to find a city or town that's in the path. And if you live right inside the path, like if you're from Indianapolis, Cleveland, or Buffalo, then you're in extra luck. You can just stay where you are. This awesome simulation of the entire path is from the Great American Eclipse website, along with literal tons of information, so check out that link. And NASA will be live streaming the entire eclipse, so if you can't be there, that's a great way to follow along too. In the end, good luck with however you want to enjoy the eclipse. And if that's just seeing other people's experiences shared online, that's fine too. I'll share my photos on my blog, and maybe I'll post some in a community post here on YouTube, but until next time, I'm Jeff Geerling.